Ethan Parker held the letter with both hands because using only one made the paper shake too much. The courtyard behind Westbridge University's main library was nearly empty at 4:30 on a cold October afternoon, and Lucas Bennett stood 6 feet away beneath a maple tree that had already lost half its leaves. Lucas was 22, an alpha, a senior, and the highest-ranked student in his class. Professors remembered his answers. Students recognized him across campus. His future seemed to have been organized years in advance. From graduation honors to the competitive fellowship everyone expected him to win. Yet standing in front of Ethan, Lucas looked like none of those things. He looked like a young man waiting for one answer. Ethan lowered his eyes to the letter. He had read it 4 times since finding it that morning, and every reading had made what he needed to do more difficult. "You do not have to explain," Lucas said. Ethan looked up. "I think I do." "You really do not." Lucas gave him a restrained smile. "I knew there was a chance you would say no when I wrote it. That should have made this easier." It did not. Ethan could still remember the final lines, almost word for word. Lucas had not promised forever. He had not written anything dramatic. He had simply admitted that somewhere between studying together, drinking coffee after class, and arguing about books in the library, Ethan had become the person Lucas hoped to see whenever he walked into a room. "Lucas, I am sorry." Something changed in Lucas's expression, so slightly that another person might have missed it. Ethan did not. "I do not feel the same." The lie came out cleanly. Lucas looked at him for several seconds. Ethan expected a question. He expected Lucas to ask whether he had misunderstood the months of conversations between them, the coffees Ethan had accepted, or the evenings they had spent studying long after their friends left. Instead, Lucas nodded once. "Okay." Ethan tightened his grip on the letter. "Okay. You said you do not feel the same." Lucas slipped his hands into the pockets of his dark coat. "I believe you." The trust in those 3 words hurt more than anger would have. "I never wanted to embarrass you," Lucas continued. "I thought writing it down would give you space to decide without putting you on the spot. You did not embarrass me." "Good." Lucas glanced toward the library doors. "Then we are okay." Ethan wanted to say yes. He wanted to preserve something from the moment before the letter existed, when Lucas could sit across from him for 2 hours and neither of them had to name what lived inside the silence. But Ethan understood enough about rejection to know that saying they were okay would not make it true. "I hope this does not make things strange," he said. Lucas gave a quiet breath that was almost a laugh. "It probably will for a while." Ethan looked down. "Right. But that is not your fault." Lucas's voice remained gentle. "You do not owe me a different answer because I wrote a good letter." Despite everything, Ethan smiled faintly. "You know it was a good letter? I am the top student." There he is. For one brief second, Lucas smiled the way he always did around Ethan, easy and unguarded. Then the expression faded. A clock chimed from the administration building across campus. Lucas checked the time. "I have a seminar." Of course. Neither moved. Ethan could have stopped this. For words would have been enough. "I lied to you." He could have told Lucas that he had noticed him months before their first real conversation. He could have admitted that every time Lucas entered the library, Ethan became aware of where he was sitting. He could have confessed that the letter was folded inside his favorite novel because he had been too afraid to leave it in his backpack where somebody might accidentally find it. Instead, Ethan remained silent. Lucas took one step backward. "See you around, Ethan." "Not tomorrow. Not at the library. Not after class. See you around." The difference was small enough to sound meaningless and large enough to frighten him. "See you," Ethan answered. Lucas turned and walked across the courtyard. Several students greeted him as he passed. Lucas responded politely without stopping. Ethan watched until the dark coat disappeared through the stone archway leading toward the humanities building. Then did he sit on the nearest bench. The October wind moved dry leaves across the pavement. Ethan unfolded the letter again. Lucas's handwriting was precise, almost annoyingly neat. Near the bottom was the sentence Ethan had been unable to forget all day. "I like who I am when I am with you, because you never seem to need me to be impressive." Ethan pressed his thumb against the words. He had told Lucas he did not feel the same because the truth terrified him more. Lucas Bennett had everything Ethan believed an alpha could want: recognition, ambition, opportunities, and a future too carefully built to survive unnecessary complications. Ethan had seen what happened when love became inconvenient to someone with too much to lose. He had promised himself he would never wait around to discover whether Lucas would eventually make the same choice. So Ethan had rejected him first. He folded the letter along its original crease and held it against his chest for one quiet second before slipping it back into his book. Across campus, Lucas entered his seminar believing the person he loved had given him an honest answer. Alone in the courtyard, Ethan finally admitted the truth he had been too afraid to say aloud. He had lied. 3 weeks earlier, Lucas Bennett had been nothing more complicated to Ethan Parker than the student everyone at Westbridge University seemed to know. Ethan knew the reputation before he knew the man. Lucas was the senior professors mentioned when discussing academic excellence, the alpha whose name appeared near the top of every honors announcement, and the student other people quietly measured themselves against. Ethan assumed someone like that would never notice him. He was wrong. Their first real conversation happened on the 3rd floor of the library during a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Ethan was searching for a book on 20th century American literature when he found Lucas standing in front of the exact shelf he needed. "You are blocking Fitzgerald," Ethan said. Lucas turned, clearly surprised. "That sounds like an accusation. It becomes one if you stay there." Lucas stepped aside. "My apologies." Ethan pulled out the book and noticed the statistics textbook under Lucas's arm. "You came to the literature floor for statistics? The economics floor is crowded. So your solution was hiding with people who read novels? You make it sound strategic. You are Lucas Bennett. I assumed everything you do is strategic." Lucas stared at him for half a second before laughing. Ethan had expected arrogance. Instead, Lucas looked almost relieved. "Do I know you?" "Ethan Parker. English literature?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You know that? We were in Professor Whitman's elective last spring." Ethan remembered immediately. Lucas had sat near the front and answered questions without raising his hand because Professor Whitman had stopped pretending anyone else would answer first. "You remember me from one class? You argued with Whitman about Hemingway for 20 minutes. He started it." Lucas smiled. "That is how I remember it too." They ended up sharing a table because every other seat near the windows was occupied. Ethan read while Lucas worked through a financial modeling assignment. For nearly an hour, neither spoke. Then Lucas pushed his laptop aside and asked, "Do you understand this?" Ethan looked at the spreadsheet. "Absolutely not." "Perfect. Why is that perfect?" "Because everyone who understands it wants to tell me how they would do it." Ethan closed his book. "And I can offer complete ignorance." Exactly. That should have been the end of it. Instead, they left the library at the same time. Rain was still falling, and Ethan had forgotten an umbrella. Lucas had one. "Which way?" he asked. "Hawthorne Hall. I am heading past there." They walked nearly half a mile across campus beneath an umbrella barely wide enough for 2 people. Ethan learned Lucas hated being called brilliant because it made every mistake feel like public property. Lucas learned Ethan worked weekend shifts at a bookstore downtown and spent too much of his paycheck buying books from the same store. 2 days later, Lucas appeared beside Ethan in the campus coffee shop. "You drink it black, right?" he asked, placing a cup on the table. Ethan stared at it. "How do you know that?" "Tuesday. You remember how I take coffee." "From Tuesday." Lucas looked momentarily embarrassed. Apparently, Ethan accepted the cup. "That is either impressive or concerning. Can it be both?" After that, coincidences became suspiciously frequent. Lucas studied at Ethan's library table. Ethan started saving the chair across from him without acknowledging that he was doing it. They walked between buildings after afternoon classes. Lucas helped Ethan understand an economics requirement he had postponed for 2 years. Ethan proofread Lucas's fellowship essay and crossed out an entire paragraph because, in his words, nobody believes a 22-year-old has been passionate about institutional leadership since childhood. Lucas protested for 10 minutes, then deleted it. What surprised Ethan most was how different Lucas seemed when nobody else was watching. Around professors, Lucas was controlled and precise. Around other students, he was friendly but guarded. With Ethan, he complained about vending machine prices, admitted when he was tired, and once spent 15 minutes trying to convince Ethan that a terrible science fiction movie deserved serious artistic consideration. Ethan began looking forward to those versions of him. He also began noticing things he wished he did not. The way Lucas always found him in crowded rooms. The way his expression softened before he smiled. The way an alpha admired by nearly everyone on campus seemed happiest when Ethan treated him like nobody special. One evening, While they packed their books after the library announced closing time, Lucas asked, "Are you here tomorrow?" Ethan slipped his notebook into his bag. "Probably. Same table." Ethan looked at the chair Lucas had occupied almost every day that week. "You know there are hundreds of tables in this building. I like this one. You like the window." Lucas held Ethan's gaze. "Something like that." Ethan understood the meaning before he was ready to name it. He looked away first. "See you tomorrow, Lucas." "See you tomorrow, Ethan." Walking back to his dorm, Ethan told himself the warmth in his chest meant nothing. Behind him, Lucas returned to the table because he had forgotten his pen. He found the notebook Ethan had accidentally left behind instead. Lucas picked it up, smiled at Ethan's name written across the cover, and realized that for the first time in years, there was something in his life he wanted without having a plan for what came next. The next morning, Ethan found Lucas waiting outside Hawthorne Hall with the notebook Ethan had left behind. Lucas held it up the moment Ethan came through the doors. "Missing something?" Ethan stopped. "I spent 20 minutes looking for that. I found it at our table." "Our table?" Lucas immediately looked amused with himself. "Apparently, I have become territorial about library furniture." Ethan took the notebook. "Thank you. I did not read it. I was not worried. You should be. Your notes might contain devastating opinions about 19th century poetry." Ethan smiled and slipped the notebook into his bag. That ordinary exchange followed Lucas through the rest of the day. By evening, he had made a decision that felt less comfortable than any examination he had ever taken. He was going to tell Ethan the truth. The problem was that Lucas could explain complex economic models in front of a lecture hall without hesitation, but every version of "I like you" sounded inadequate when he practiced it alone. So he did what he always did when speaking failed him. He wrote. The first attempt sounded like an application essay. Lucas tore it up. The second sounded too careful. The third was honest enough to frighten him, so he kept it. He wrote about small things. He told Ethan he had started choosing the third floor of the library because Ethan was usually there. He admitted he remembered the black coffee because he remembered almost everything Ethan said. He wrote that he liked their walks across campus even when the weather was terrible, and that Ethan was the only person who could criticize his fellowship essay without making him feel as though he had failed some invisible test. Most importantly, Lucas wrote what he had never managed to say aloud. Around Ethan, he did not feel like Westbridge's top student or the alpha everyone expected to succeed. He could simply be Lucas. The next afternoon, he carried the folded letter in his coat pocket for nearly 3 hours. Twice he almost handed it directly to Ethan. Twice his courage disappeared at the last second. Their usual library table was occupied, so Ethan wandered toward the literature shelves searching for a novel he had mentioned wanting to reread. Lucas saw his opportunity. "Did you find it?" he asked. "Not yet." "What was the title?" Ethan told him. Lucas located the book on a return cart before Ethan could. While Ethan was distracted by another shelf, Lucas slipped the folded letter between the pages. "Found it." Ethan accepted the book. Being academically gifted finally became useful. "I have been waiting years for this moment." Ethan laughed and placed the novel in his bag. Lucas immediately regretted everything. For the next hour, he barely understood the numbers on his laptop. Ethan eventually noticed. "Are you feeling okay?" "Fine. You have been staring at the same spreadsheet for 10 minutes. It is a complicated spreadsheet." Ethan leaned closer to the screen. "You are on the login page." Lucas closed the laptop. "Maybe I am tired." Ethan studied him with obvious suspicion, but let it go. They left the library shortly before 6. At the walkway where they usually separated, Lucas nearly confessed that something was inside the book. Instead, he said, "See you tomorrow." Ethan smiled. "Same table. If you can tolerate me." "I have managed so far." Lucas watched him walk toward Hawthorne Hall and wondered how long it would take him to discover the letter. The answer was 43 minutes. Ethan was sitting at his desk when he opened the novel and the folded paper fell into his lap. His name was written across the front in Lucas's unmistakably precise handwriting. For several seconds, Ethan only stared. Then he unfolded it. The opening sentences confirmed what he had already begun to suspect, but knowing did not prepare him for the tenderness of the details Lucas remembered. There were no grand promises and no expectations. Lucas simply described the quiet accumulation of moments that had made Ethan important to him. Ethan read the letter once. Then again. On the third reading, he stopped at one sentence. "I like Who I am when I am with you. Because you never seem to need me to be impressive. Ethan closed his eyes. His first emotion was happiness, immediate and impossible to deny. His second was fear. He placed the letter on his desk and walked to the window. Students crossed the campus below beneath yellow streetlights. Somewhere among those buildings was Lucas, probably wondering whether Ethan had found what he had written. Ethan picked up his phone. A message from Lucas had arrived 2 minutes earlier. Did you find the book? Ethan looked at the letter beside him. His fingers hovered over the screen before he answered. Yes. Lucas replied almost immediately. And everything inside it. Ethan's heart beat faster. Yes. Several seconds passed. Then another message appeared. Could we talk tomorrow? Ethan knew what Lucas wanted. More painfully, he knew what he wanted too. Yet an old memory surfaced before he could answer, carrying a warning Ethan had spent years teaching himself never to ignore. He typed slowly. Behind the library at 4:30. Lucas answered, I will be there. Ethan set down the phone and read the letter one final time. By midnight, he had decided what he would say. It was not the truth. After Lucas disappeared through the stone archway, Ethan remained on the courtyard bench until the cold finally reached through his coat. The letter rested inside his book, folded with the same careful crease Lucas had made. But Ethan could still hear the quiet way Lucas had said, I believe you. That was the part he had not prepared for. Ethan had expected disappointment, perhaps confusion, maybe even an argument that would allow him to defend his decision. Instead, Lucas had respected the answer immediately. Ethan returned to Hawthorne Hall after sunset and found his roommate, Mason Reed, sitting at his desk with headphones around his neck. Mason glanced up. You look like you just failed an exam. I did not. Then something worse happened. Ethan placed his book on the desk. The letter remained hidden inside. I told someone no. Mason waited. Someone you wanted to say yes to? Ethan looked at him sharply. Why would you assume that? Because people who reject someone they do not like usually look relieved. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed. It was Lucas. Mason's eyebrows rose. Lucas Bennett. There are not many other Lucases who need the last name repeated like that. The Lucas Bennett who has been studying with you every day? Ethan nodded. He wrote me a letter. And you rejected him? Yes. Mason studied him for several seconds. Do you like him? Ethan should have answered no as easily as he had in the courtyard. Instead, he opened the book and removed the letter. That is not the point. That sounds very much like yes. Ethan stared at Lucas's handwriting. Lucas has a fellowship interview next month. He is graduating with honors. Professors already talk about him like his future belongs in a brochure. He knows exactly where he is going. And I know what happens when someone becomes inconvenient to a person with that kind of future. The memory Ethan had avoided the night before returned with uncomfortable clarity. He was 17 when his uncle Daniel, an Omega, had spent months planning a life with an ambitious alpha named Gregory. Gregory had promised that success would change nothing between them. Then a prestigious position arrived in another state, along with pressure from a family that considered Daniel unsuitable for the image they wanted. Gregory chose the career, the approval, and the easier future. Daniel eventually rebuilt his life, but Ethan never forgot how quickly promises became negotiable when status entered the room. Mason's voice softened. Lucas is not Gregory. I know. Do you? Ethan folded the letter again. Lucas is already under pressure. Everyone expects something from him. What happens when being with me becomes another thing he has to explain? You are assuming he would choose everyone else. I am making sure I never have to find out. Mason shook his head. That is not the same thing. Ethan did not answer. The next morning, he arrived at the library 20 minutes earlier than usual. Their table beside the window was empty. Without thinking, Ethan placed his bag on one chair and his coffee on the table, leaving the seat opposite him open. At 9:15, Lucas usually appeared with his laptop and some complaint about the campus coffee. 9:15 passed. Then 9:30. At 9:40, Ethan finally opened his book. He read the same paragraph 4 times. Lucas never came. At 11, Ethan crossed the student center and spotted him near the stairs. For one instinctive second, Ethan almost lifted his hand. Lucas saw him too. His steps slowed, and the familiar warmth appeared in his expression before something seemed to remind him of yesterday. He gave Ethan a polite nod. Morning. Morning. Lucas continued toward the economics building. Ethan stood still. There had been nothing cruel in the exchange. That somehow made it worse. Over the next several days, the pattern continued. Lucas did not punish him. He simply stopped creating reasons for them to be together. No coffee appeared beside Ethan's books. No message asked whether he was studying that afternoon. Lucas no longer walked the extra half-mile toward Hawthorne Hall after class. When they crossed paths, he was courteous. When Ethan spoke, Lucas answered. Nothing Lucas did could reasonably be called unkind. Ethan had asked for distance without actually using the word, and Lucas was giving it to him. By Friday, the empty chair across from Ethan had become impossible to ignore. He tried another table. It felt worse. He tried studying in his dorm. He accomplished almost nothing. That afternoon, Ethan bought coffee before returning to the library. He reached their old table, set down his bag, and only then noticed he was carrying 2 cups. One was black. The other was Lucas's usual order. Ethan stared at them, embarrassed even though nobody was watching. He had rejected Lucas because he believed ending something before it began would protect him from being left behind later. Yet Lucas had accepted his decision exactly as Ethan had asked him to, and the result did not feel like safety. It felt like losing something he had never allowed himself to have. Ethan sat down and opened the book containing the letter. He did not unfold it. He did not need to. He already knew every line that mattered. Across the library, someone laughed, and for half a second, Ethan thought it was Lucas. He looked up automatically. It was not. Ethan lowered his eyes to the untouched second cup of coffee and understood the part of his plan he had never considered. He had been so afraid Lucas might one day choose a future without him that Ethan had chosen that future for both of them. By the following Monday, Ethan had learned that absence could develop routines of its own. He still arrived at the library around 9, still chose the table beside the tall windows, and still caught himself looking toward the entrance whenever footsteps approached. Lucas never appeared. Ethan told himself this was what he had wanted. Lucas was respecting the boundary Ethan had created, and there was nothing unfair about that. The problem was that Ethan had never realized how many ordinary moments Lucas had quietly occupied until every one of them became empty. On Tuesday afternoon, Ethan left his American fiction seminar and crossed the main quad toward the student center. Halfway there, he saw Lucas standing beside the fountain with another student. Ethan recognized Nathan Cole immediately. Nathan was a 22-year-old alpha, captain of the debate team, confident enough to speak to a crowded auditorium without notes and friendly enough that people rarely disliked him. Ethan had seen Nathan and Lucas together at academic events before, but never paid attention. Now he noticed everything. Nathan said something that made Lucas laugh. It was not the restrained smile Lucas had given Ethan after the rejection. It was the familiar laugh Ethan remembered from the library, warm and unguarded. Ethan slowed without meaning to. Nathan handed Lucas a coffee. Lucas accepted it. Ethan looked away and immediately became irritated with himself. "You rejected him," he whispered under his breath. The sentence did not help. He continued toward the student center, but 10 minutes later, he was still thinking about the coffee. That evening, Mason found Ethan pretending to read at their dorm room desk. "You have been on that page since I came in." Ethan turned it. Problem solved. Mason dropped his backpack beside the bed. "What happened?" "Nothing." "Lucas." Ethan looked up too quickly. Mason smiled. "Definitely Lucas. I saw him with Nathan Cole. And nothing. You sound very bothered by nothing." Ethan closed the book. Nathan gave him coffee. Mason stared at him. "That criminal." "I am serious." "So am I. We should alert campus security immediately." Ethan gave him an annoyed look. Mason sat down. "Do you think they are dating?" "I do not care. That was not my question." Ethan hesitated. "I do not know." The possibility bothered him more once spoken aloud. The next day, Ethan saw them again outside the economics building. Nathan carried a folder from the debate society, and Lucas was reading something inside it as they walked. There was nothing romantic about the scene. They could easily have been discussing an event. Ethan knew that. His imagination ignored the evidence. He remembered Lucas's letter, then imagined Lucas eventually writing something equally thoughtful for someone else. The thought landed harder than he expected. Lucas looked up and noticed him. For 1 second, their eyes met across the walkway. Ethan waited for the polite nod he had grown accustomed to. Instead, Nathan said something, drawing Lucas's attention away before either man acknowledged the other. Ethan kept walking. By Thursday, he was angry with himself. He had no claim on Lucas. He had been given an opportunity and rejected it. Lucas was allowed to laugh with Nathan, drink coffee with Nathan, study with Nathan, or fall in love with Nathan if that was what he wanted. Ethan repeated those facts until they sounded like lines from an argument he was losing. Friday afternoon brought the moment that finally broke through his denial. Ethan entered the library carrying one coffee and congratulated himself for remembering not to buy two. Their old table was occupied. Lucas was sitting there. Ethan stopped. For the first time since the courtyard, Lucas had returned to the place they once shared. Then Ethan noticed Nathan in the chair opposite him. Nathan leaned over a laptop, while Lucas pointed toward something on the screen. Ethan felt something twist painfully inside his chest. Lucas glanced up. Surprise crossed his face. Ethan. Nathan turned. Hey, Parker. Ethan forced himself to smile. Hey. Lucas moved his backpack from the third chair. You can sit here if you want. The invitation was polite, exactly the kind Lucas might offer any classmate. Ethan looked at the empty chair. 3 weeks earlier, he would have dropped his bag there without asking. I have some reading to finish upstairs, he said. Sure. Lucas nodded. See you around. There were those words again. Ethan walked away before his expression could betray him. He climbed to the 4th floor, found a table in the far corner, and opened his book without seeing a single sentence. 10 minutes later, Mason texted him asking where he was. Ethan answered, library. Mason replied, with Lucas. Ethan stared at the question. No, he is downstairs with Nathan. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Are you jealous? Ethan typed no. He deleted it. He typed maybe. He deleted that too. Finally, he locked his phone without answering. He reached into his bag and found Lucas's letter between the pages of the novel. This time he unfolded it. The paper was beginning to soften along the crease from being opened too often. Ethan read the familiar words and understood something he had been avoiding since the courtyard. He had believed rejecting Lucas would remove uncertainty. Instead, he had created a different kind, one in which every smile Lucas gave someone else made Ethan wonder whether he had thrown away something real because he was afraid of something that had not happened. Below him, Lucas and Nathan eventually left the library together. Ethan watched them cross the quad through the 4th floor window. He could no longer pretend the ache in his chest was simple regret. For the first time, Ethan admitted the word he had been refusing to use. He was jealous. That evening, Ethan found Mason in the dorm lounge attempting to repair a coffee maker that had apparently stopped cooperating with half the building. Ethan sat on the couch without saying anything. Mason looked over his shoulder. You have the expression again. What expression? The Lucas expression. Ethan leaned back and stared at the ceiling. I am jealous. Mason. Abandon the coffee maker. Finally, you could pretend to be surprised. I watched you accidentally buy the man coffee after rejecting him. Ethan covered his face for a moment. I know how ridiculous this is. Jealousy is not the ridiculous part. Mason sat in the chair opposite him. The ridiculous part is pretending you have no idea why you feel it. Ethan lowered his hands. I like him. Saying it aloud felt frighteningly simple. Mason nodded. Then why did you tell him the opposite? Ethan was quiet. Because I thought it would be easier. For whom? Me. Ethan looked toward the dark windows. When I was 17, my uncle Daniel was with an alpha named Gregory. They had been together for years. Gregory got offered an executive position in another state. His family wanted him to build a certain kind of life, with the right connections and the right image. Daniel did not fit their plan. Mason listened without interrupting. Gregory kept saying nothing would change. Then everything did. He moved. He stopped calling as often. Eventually, he told Daniel that the relationship had become too complicated for the future he was building. Ethan swallowed. I watched my uncle spend months wondering why being loved had not been enough. And Lucas reminds you of Gregory? Not as a person. Then what? Ethan thought about it. The future. The expectations. Lucas is an alpha everyone already expects to become somebody important. He has professors recommending him for fellowships. He has graduate programs contacting him. People talk about him like the next 10 years of his life are already scheduled. So you decided that one day he would choose those things over you. I decided I did not want to become something he eventually had to choose between. Mason leaned forward. Ethan, did you reject Lucas because you did not want him, or because you thought he would eventually reject you? Ethan said nothing. The question settled into the silence with uncomfortable precision. Mason continued more gently. Your uncle's story matters. It explains why you are afraid. But it does not tell you what Lucas would do. Ethan looked down at his hands. What if I was right? Then you would be hurt. Exactly. And what if you were wrong? Ethan immediately thought of the empty library chair. Lucas laughing with Nathan. The letter folded inside a novel because Lucas had wanted Ethan to have space instead of pressure. Then I hurt both of us for nothing. Mason nodded. Ethan returned to their room and opened the letter again. This time he read it differently. He searched for ambition, expectation, or any hint that Lucas wanted Ethan to fit into some predetermined future. There was none. Lucas had written about coffee, rainy walks, bad movies, books, and the relief of not needing to be impressive. Ethan stopped at the final lines. Lucas had not asked Ethan to promise anything. He had only asked whether they might try. The realization made Ethan feel worse, because his answer had not actually been about Lucas. It had been an answer to Gregory, to an old memory, to a future Ethan had imagined before Lucas ever had the chance to create one. Monday morning, Ethan arrived at the library determined to speak to him. Their table was empty. He waited until 10, then checked the economics building between classes. No Lucas. At lunch, he finally saw Nathan outside the student center. Ethan almost walked past him, then stopped. Nathan. Nathan turned. Hey, can I ask you something? Sure. Ethan immediately regretted beginning. You and Lucas have been spending time together. Nathan's expression shifted into amusement. We have. Ethan tried to sound casual. Are you two dating? Nathan stared at him for a second, then laughed. No. Ethan felt relief so immediate that it embarrassed him. Nathan continued. Lucas is helping me prepare a funding proposal for the debate team. What? No reason. That sounded like a reason. Ethan looked away. Nathan seemed to understand something. For what it is worth, I did ask him to dinner. The relief vanished. Oh. He said no. Ethan looked back at him. He did. Very politely. Nathan smiled. Lucas is good at that. Ethan knew exactly how much a polite rejection could hurt. Did he say why? Not really. He said he was not ready to start something with anyone. Nathan adjusted the folder under his arm. Then he asked me to stop buying him coffee because apparently somebody else ruined his ability to enjoy it normally. Ethan's chest tightened. Nathan studied him. I am guessing you know something about that. Ethan did not answer. He did not need to. Nathan gave him a sympathetic look and walked away. Ethan remained outside the student center while students moved around him. Lucas had not replaced him. More importantly, Lucas had not done anything to make Ethan jealous. Ethan had created that fear himself, just as he had created the future in which Lucas would eventually abandon him. For weeks, Ethan had been treating possibilities like evidence. That afternoon, he returned to the courtyard behind the library where he had rejected Lucas. The maple tree was nearly bare now. Ethan stood exactly where Lucas had stood and finally understood how unfair his certainty had been. Lucas had offered him honesty, and Ethan had answered with a fear that belonged to someone else's story. He pulled out his phone and opened their old messages. His thumb hovered over Lucas's name. For the first time since the rejection, Ethan knew what he wanted to say. The question was whether Lucas still wanted to hear it. Ethan did not send the message. He wrote it 3 times while standing beneath the nearly bare maple tree, deleted it 3 times, then locked his phone and slipped it back into his coat pocket. An apology delivered through a screen felt too easy after the lie he had told Lucas face to face. If Ethan wanted another chance to be honest, he needed enough courage to look Lucas in the eyes when he asked for it. The opportunity came the next afternoon outside the economics building. Ethan had just crossed the quad when he heard 2 students talking near the steps. Bennett got the Boston Fellowship. Ethan stopped. One of them continued. Apparently, he leaves before the semester officially ends. The program wants him there early. The words landed with a weight Ethan had not expected. He waited until the students walked away, then pulled out his phone and searched the university fellowship announcement. There it was. Lucas Bennett had been selected for a competitive academic fellowship in Boston, with an early placement beginning in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Ethan read the date twice. Lucas had mentioned the fellowship before the letter, but back then it had seemed like another distant achievement in the carefully planned future Ethan feared. Now it had a departure date. That evening, Ethan found Mason in their room. Lucas is leaving. Mason looked up from his laptop. Leaving Westbridge. Boston. 3 weeks. Did he tell you? Ethan shook his head. Why would he? Mason closed the laptop. Are you going to talk to him? I was already going to. Then this changes the deadline, not the decision. Ethan knew Mason was right. The next morning, he went to the library earlier than usual. Lucas was not there. At noon, Ethan checked the student center. Nothing. After his afternoon class, he finally spotted Lucas near the administration building talking with Professor Whitman. Ethan started toward them, then slowed when he heard his own name. You seem distracted lately, Professor Whitman said. Lucas gave a tired smile. I am fine. This would not happen to involve Parker, would it? Ethan froze behind a stone column before either man could see him. Lucas was silent for a moment. It does not matter. That usually means it matters. I told him how I felt. He did not feel the same. That is the whole story. Ethan's chest tightened. Professor Whitman said something too quietly for Ethan to hear. Lucas answered, No, I am not angry with him. Ethan was honest with me. The words hurt because Lucas still believed them. Then why are you avoiding him? The professor asked. Lucas hesitated. Because I know myself. If I keep sitting across from him every morning and pretending nothing changed, I will keep hoping he changes his mind. That would not be fair to either of us. Ethan closed his eyes. Every empty chair suddenly had an explanation. Lucas had not disappeared to punish him. He had been trying to accept the answer Ethan gave him. Professor Whitman asked, and Boston? Maybe leaving early is good timing. Running away? Lucas gave a quiet laugh. I prefer strategic relocation. That sounds like something the top student would say. I have a reputation to maintain. Ethan heard footsteps and moved away before they could discover him. He crossed the quad with Lucas's words repeating in his mind. If I keep sitting across from him, I will keep hoping. Ethan had spent weeks believing Lucas was moving on easily, while secretly resenting every sign that he might. The truth was almost the opposite. Lucas still cared, but he respected Ethan enough not to turn those feelings into pressure. Ethan reached Hawthorne Hall and found Mason near the entrance. I heard Lucas talking to Professor Whitman. Mason studied his face. And he still thinks I told him the truth. Because you did not tell him otherwise. Ethan nodded. I know. So what are you going to do? This time Ethan did not hesitate. Tell him everything. He checked his phone. No messages from Lucas. Tomorrow. Mason raised an eyebrow. Why tomorrow? Lucas studies in the library on Thursday mornings before his seminar. At least he used to. And if he is not there, I find him somewhere else. For the first time since the courtyard, Ethan sounded certain. The next morning, he arrived shortly after 8. Their table was empty. He waited 30 minutes. Then an hour. Lucas never came. Ethan finally approached the circulation desk and asked whether the librarian had seen him. The woman recognized Lucas immediately. Mr. Bennett? He was here yesterday evening returning several books. Several. He said he was clearing his account before leaving campus. Ethan stared at her. Already. I believe his plans changed. She checked something on her computer. His departure paperwork says Friday. Ethan felt the floor beneath his certainty disappear. Friday was tomorrow. Lucas was not leaving in 3 weeks anymore. He was leaving in less than 24 hours. Ethan reached for his phone and called him. The call rang until voicemail answered. He tried once more. No response. Ethan looked toward their old table beside the window. For weeks, he had believed he still had time to correct the lie. Now the empty chair carried a different meaning. Lucas was no longer simply keeping his distance. He was leaving. Ethan left the circulation desk with his phone still in his hand and called Lucas a third time. Voicemail answered again. He did not leave a message. There were things he needed to say, and hearing them recorded after Lucas had already left would turn honesty into another missed opportunity. Ethan crossed the library toward their old table, trying to decide where Lucas might be. His dorm, the economics building, Professor Whitman's office, the student center. Before Ethan reached the stairs, the librarian called after him. Mr. Parker? He turned. She held up a hardcover novel. I almost forgot. Mr. Bennett asked me to give you this if you came by. Ethan walked back slowly. He recognized the book before she placed it in his hands. It was the same novel Lucas had used to hide the letter weeks earlier. When did he leave this? Last night. Did he say anything? Only that you would understand. Ethan thanked her and carried the book to the table beside the window. The chair across from him remained empty. For a moment, he simply looked at it, remembering Lucas arriving with coffee, opening his laptop, complaining about impossible deadlines, and pretending he preferred this particular table because of the window. Ethan opened the book. The letter was inside. His breath caught. He pulled it free and unfolded it carefully. It was the original letter, the same precise handwriting, the same crease softened from all the times Ethan had read it. He began again from the first line. This time he forced himself not to rush. Lucas remembered the black coffee, the rainy walks, Ethan's arguments about books. The terrible science fiction movie Lucas had insisted deserved respect. None of it described Ethan as an obstacle to Lucas's plans. None of it asked Ethan to become someone more impressive. Lucas had written about the ordinary version of their lives, the version Ethan had destroyed because he feared some hypothetical future would destroy it later. He reached the sentence that had stayed with him from the beginning. Lucas liked who he was around Ethan because Ethan never needed him to be impressive. Ethan lowered the page. The irony was almost painful. He had been afraid Lucas would eventually value achievement more than love, while Lucas had fallen for Ethan partly because Ethan made achievement irrelevant. Ethan thought about Uncle Daniel and Gregory again. For years, he had carried their ending like a warning. But a warning was supposed to help someone recognize danger, not convince him that every person would make the same choice. Lucas had never asked Ethan to compete with Boston, a fellowship, graduation, or anyone else's expectations. Ethan had created that competition by himself. He had not rejected Lucas because Lucas was untrustworthy. He had rejected him because trusting someone required accepting that the future could not be guaranteed. Ethan looked back at the letter. Something seemed different near the bottom. Beneath the final paragraph, Lucas had added a short note in darker ink. Ethan's heart quickened, but before he could read it, someone pulled out the chair opposite him. Ethan looked up. Nathan Cole sat down. "I thought I might find you here." Ethan folded the letter instinctively. "Do you know where Lucas is?" Nathan nodded. He had a meeting this morning about the fellowship. His program offered him an earlier start after another participant withdrew. "That is why he is leaving tomorrow?" "Yes." "Where is he now?" "I do not know." He was finishing paperwork and packing. Ethan stood. Nathan glanced at the letter. "He gave that back?" "He left it with the librarian." Nathan's expression softened. "Then I think he is trying to let go." Ethan looked toward the windows. "I do not want him to." "Does Lucas know that?" "No." Nathan leaned back. "Then you have a fairly obvious problem." Ethan almost laughed despite himself. "Everyone seems to understand this except me. You understand it now." Nathan stood. "That still counts." After Nathan left, Ethan unfolded the letter again and finally read the added line. It was only 7 words. "I meant every word. I just will not ask twice." Ethan stared at it. There was no accusation, no demand. Lucas was not asking Ethan to chase him. He was simply closing the door Ethan had refused to walk through. Ethan folded the letter and slipped it carefully inside his coat. Then he called. Lucas again. Voicemail. This time, Ethan waited for the tone. "Lucas, it is Ethan. I need to tell you something, and I need to tell you in person. Please do not leave without letting me try." He ended the call and immediately walked out of the library. The afternoon air was cold enough to sting his face. Students moved across the quad while Ethan searched every familiar path. He checked the economics building first, then the student center. No Lucas. He hurried toward the senior residence halls, but the front desk attendant told him Lucas had checked out earlier that afternoon. Ethan stepped outside again, breathless and frustrated. His phone remained silent. Then he remembered something Lucas had said during one of their first rainy walks. Whenever Westbridge became too loud, there was one place on campus where Lucas went because almost nobody else bothered to climb that far. Ethan looked across the quad toward the old humanities building and its 5th-floor reading room. For weeks, fear had made every decision for him. Not this one. Ethan started walking, then broke into a run. Lucas had been brave enough to tell the truth once. Now it was Ethan's turn. Ethan reached the old humanities building with his lungs burning from the run across campus. The elevator was out of service, so he took the stairs, climbing 5 floors while the words from Lucas's note repeated in his mind. "I just will not ask twice." By the time Ethan reached the reading room, his hands were cold and his breathing uneven. He pushed open the heavy wooden door. The room was almost empty. Late afternoon lights stretched across rows of old tables, and beside the far window sat Lucas Bennett with a closed laptop, a paper coffee cup, and one small travel bag resting near his chair. Lucas looked up. Surprise crossed his face. "Ethan." Ethan stopped several feet away. Every speech he had rehearsed disappeared. Lucas stood. Are you okay? No. Ethan tried to catch his breath. But I think I finally understand why. Lucas waited. Ethan pulled the folded letter from his coat. You left this for me. Lucas glanced at it. I thought you should have it. You added something. I meant it. I know. Ethan stepped closer. That is why I came. Lucas's expression became guarded. Ethan, you do not owe me an explanation because I am leaving. I owe you the truth because I did not give it to you the first time. Lucas went still. Ethan looked directly at him. I lied in the courtyard. Silence filled the reading room. About what? Lucas asked. Ethan's voice shook, but he continued. When I said I did not feel the same. Lucas stared at him. Why would you lie about that? Because I was afraid. Ethan explained Daniel and Gregory, the relationship he had watched collapse when ambition and family expectations became more important than love. He admitted that Lucas's fellowship, reputation, alpha status, and carefully planned future had frightened him before Lucas had ever done anything wrong. I decided you would eventually leave me before you ever had the chance to choose, Ethan said. I thought rejecting you first would protect me. Lucas looked toward the window. It did not feel protective from my side. I know. Ethan swallowed. And I am sorry. You trusted me with something honest, and I answered with a fear that belonged to somebody else's story. Lucas remained quiet long enough that Ethan understood something he should have understood earlier. Telling the truth did not guarantee forgiveness. Courage was not a transaction. Ethan could finally be honest and still hear no. Nathan told me you turned him down. Ethan continued. Lucas raised an eyebrow. You asked Nathan about me? It was not my most dignified week. Despite himself, Lucas smiled. Were you jealous? Completely. The smile faded into something gentler. Ethan, I still care about you. That is exactly why I stopped sitting with you. I could not keep waiting for an answer you had already given me. Then I am not asking you to forget that answer. Ethan held the letter between them. I am asking whether I can give you a truthful one now. Lucas studied him. And Boston. You should go. Lucas looked surprised. Ethan continued. That was the mistake I made before. I treated your future like it had to compete with me. I do not want you to give up something you worked for just to prove you care. The fellowship starts Monday. I know. That is nearly 200 miles away. I know that too. Lucas gave a small breath of laughter. You really did your research. I had a long walk between buildings. For the first time, the tension between them eased. Lucas sat down again and gestured toward the chair opposite him. Ethan took it. The familiar arrangement made his chest ache, but differently now. Lucas wrapped both hands around his coffee. What is the truthful answer? Ethan looked at him. I like you. I have for longer than I admitted to myself. I cannot promise I will never be afraid, but I can promise not to make your decisions for you again. Lucas considered that. I cannot promise Boston will be easy. I am not asking for easy. And I am not writing another letter. Ethan smiled. That seems fair. Lucas reached across the table and rested his hand beside Ethan's, leaving the final inch between them. This time Ethan crossed it. Their fingers touched, then settled together naturally on the worn wooden surface. Nothing else needed to happen. No dramatic promise could improve the quiet certainty of Lucas not pulling away. The next morning, Ethan met him outside the residence hall with 2 coffees. Lucas accepted his cup and looked at the label. You remembered. I always remembered. They walked toward the shuttle stop beneath a pale November sky. Lucas's travel bag rolled behind him. When the bus arrived, neither pretended the goodbye was permanent. Lucas stepped aboard, then turned. Same table when I visit. Ethan smiled. I will save your chair. Weeks later, that chair would sometimes hold Lucas during weekend visits, and sometimes remain empty while they talked by phone from different cities. Ethan would still worry occasionally. Lucas would still plan too much. Neither would become fearless. But on that first morning, Ethan returned to the library, placed 1 coffee beside his books instead of 2, and opened Lucas's letter one more time. Beneath the sentence about never asking twice, Ethan wrote a line of his own. You did not have to. I finally answered.